Hello, we are Group 2 and we are going to present a case study of politics and violence in Israel and Palestine. Our group consists of 6 members. Those are Salsabila Putri, Angeli, Meilyanti, Marcella, Alfonz, Maulana, Ramadhan, Akmal Tawakal, Aldo Yosia, and Najib, Yunardi. The story of Arab regionalism. On 1960, several regional organizations were created to foster cooperation among states and people of Latin America, Africa, and Asia. There was also the case of the League of Arab States, which created in March 22, 1945. However, in the discussions that preceded the signature of the 1944 Protocol of Alexandria, when the then independent Arab states agreed to form a league, the union of the Arab peoples under a single unified Arab state was one of the options on the negotiating table. The main purpose of the organization was to coordinate the political activities of its member states. If the Pact of the League of Arab States defined the basis on which the relations among Arab states should be coordinated, it was the 1950 Treaty of Joint Defense and Economic Cooperation between the states of the Arab League, which directed the Arab states towards the development of political projects for the mutual protection of its members in case of external aggression, as well as mutual cooperation for their economic development. If the main Arab regional organizations and its subsidiaries created to promote cooperation among the Arab states follow the same logics as those created in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, a specific characteristic will differentiate the LAS from any other regional organizations in the world. The strong character of Arab identity forged throughout the centuries of the development of the history of the Arab people. Contrary to what has happened with other regional organizations in the world, notably in the former colonized world, the LAS has had to deal with the intense transnational movement of peoples and the existence of social institutions operating across the Arab states' boundaries, even before its inception.
After the UN voted to partition the British Mandate of Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state, or known as the Partition Plan, it sought to divide the British Mandate of Palestine into Arab and Jewish states. Clashes broke out almost immediately between Jews and Arabs in Palestine. The decision on the mandate didn't take account on the wishes of the people of Palestine. As British troops prepared to withdraw from Palestine, conflict continued to escalate, with both Jewish and Arab forces committing war. On the eve of British forces, May 15, 1948, withdrawal, Israel declared independence. The next day, Arab forces from Egypt, Transjordan, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon occupied the areas in southern and eastern Palestine, not apportioned to the Jews by the UN partition of Palestine, and then captured East Jerusalem, including the small Jewish quarter on the Old City. The Israelis, meanwhile, won control of the main road to Jerusalem through the Yehuda mountains, and successfully repulsed repeated Arab attacks. The war ended in 1949 with Israel's victory, but around 750,000 Palestinians were displaced and the territory was divided into 3 parts: the State of Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip.
1967 is Six-Day War. Arab and Israeli forces clashed for the third time June 5 to 10, 1967, in what came to be called the Six-Day War. Then in October 1973, Egypt and Syria attacked Israel on the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur to attempt to regain the land lost in the Six-Day War. The sporadic fighting that followed the Six-Day War again developed into full-scale war. On October 6th, the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur, Israel was caught off guard by Egyptian force crossing the Suez Canal and by Syrian force crossing into the Golan Heights. The fighting, which lasted throughout the Islamic holy month of Ramadan, came to an end on October 26th. continued by the Lebanon War in 1982. On June 5, 1982, less than 6 weeks after Israel's complete withdrawal from the Sinai, increased tensions between Israelis and Palestinians resulted in the Israeli bombing of Beirut and southern Lebanon, where the Palestine Liberation Organization or PLO had a number of strongholds. The following day, Israel invaded Lebanon, and by June 14th, its land force reached as far as the outskirts of Beirut, which was encircled, but the Israeli government agreed to halt its advance and begin negotiation with the PLO. After much delay and massive Israeli shelling of West Beirut, the PLO evacuated the city under the supervision of a multinational force. Eventually, Israeli troops withdrew from West Beirut, and the Israeli army had withdrawn entirely from Lebanon by June 1985.
In the late 1980s came the Palestinian uprising, the Intifada. Young Palestinians confront Israel's troops with nothing more than slings, shots, and stones. Thousands were killed by the Israeli military. Oslo People Accord in 1993, whereby Israel recognized the PLO and gave them limited autonomy in return for peace and to Palestinian claims on Israeli territory. Later in 1994, Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip. 2006, Second Lebanon War in July 2006. Hezbollah launched an operation against Israel in an attempt to pressure the country into releasing Lebanese prisoners, killing a number of Israeli soldiers in the process and capturing 2. Israel launched an offensive into southern Lebanon to recover the captured soldiers. After more than 50 years of war, terrorism, peace negotiation, and human suffering, Israel and Palestine have so far not found a peaceful solution. Scope: tensions are often high between Israel and Palestinians living in East Jerusalem, Gaza, and the West Bank. Gaza is ruled by the Palestinian militant group Hamas, which has fought Israel many times. Israel and Egypt tightly control Gaza's border to stop weapons getting to Hamas. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is one of the world's longest-running and the most controversial conflict. At its heart, it is a conflict between two self-determination movements, the Jewish Zionist Project and the Palestinian National Project, that lay claim to the same territory.
We can see the realism paradigm in this case. Realism emphasizes the role of the nation-state and makes a broad assumption to all nation-states are motivated by national interest, or at best national interest disguised as moral concern. At its most fundamental level, the national interest is generic and easy to define. All states seek to preserve their political autonomy and their territorial integrity. Once these two interests have been secured, however, the national interest may take different forms. Some states may have interest in securing more resources or land. Other states may wish to expand their own political or economic system into other areas. Some states might merely wish to be left alone. In this case, Israel and Palestine are in conflict because of their ego who want the same land and for one country only. This conflict will never end unless there is pressure from outside to enter one of the countries' realms to find a right resolution with a third party. They attack each other so that territory is safe and not controlled by anyone. Realism view that the strength of a country is seen from the physical strength such as area, military strength, etc. To maintain the security and define the country as well as comparison with other countries, in this case the power of Palestine is decreasing physically and can be considered weakened. Change in state power will affect the behavior and motivation of a country to conduct international relations. In that way, the actor in this case is state, which is Israel and Palestine, with UN as the third party. There are also non-state actors, Hamas organization, PLO, and Fatah organization.
Current issues. A. Politics in Israel. Netanyahu as the Prime Minister of Israel who failed to form a government after failing in the Israeli election tried to thwart the formation of an alternative government under the leadership of Israeli opposition figure Yair Lapid with this war pact. Through this war, Netanyahu hopes to win the support of the Israeli people in the upcoming election. All this unexpected development led to Netanyahu's political plan behind the attack on Gaza, this time completely out of control, and it is possible that all this development could actually put Netanyahu in a prison cell. B. Politics in Palestine. Meanwhile, from the Palestinian side, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict this time also has a political context that is no less fiery. Palestine will hold parliamentary election on May 22nd, followed by presidential election on July 31st. This election planning is the result of long negotiation to achieve Palestinian unity between factions in Palestine, especially between Hamas and Fatah. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has postponed the election schedule on the ground that there is no guarantee of permission from Israel regarding the holding of election in Jerusalem. The delay has been criticized, especially by major factions such as Hamas. And the last one, C. Violence. For more than 70 years, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has affected the Middle East landscape. Recent events, including unrest in East Jerusalem and the 11th day war in Gaza, have brought the Israeli-Palestinian conflict back to the forefront of international attention. U.S. IPs Lucy Kurtzer Ellenbogen and Ambassador Hesham Yusuf discussed the broad trends they've been tracking, including the shift in favor of a two-state solution, the future of the Oslo framework, the role of the United States and the international community, and what could change the needle for peace.
And last, we have trivia. Number 1. In March 26, 1979, Egypt made peace treaty with Israel. Because of that, LAS kicked Egypt out and moved the central office from Egypt to Tunis. But in 1989, LAS accepted Egypt back as a member and the central office headed back to Cairo in 1990. The role of LAS became less clear because after LAS removed Egypt from its member, Egypt was accepted again as a member even though Egypt still admitted Israel as a country and continued to cooperate with Israel and America. Number 2. Between February and July 1949, as a result of separate armistice agreements between Israel and each of the Arab states, a temporary frontier was fixed between Israel and its neighbors. In Israel, the war is remembered as its War of Independence. In the Arab world, it came to be known as the Nakba, or catastrophe, because of the large number of refugees and displaced persons resulting from the war.
That's all from Group 2. We're gladly anticipating the question from all groups.